Greetings, theists and non-theists. I am the Atheist Paladin. I'm going to be doing a video to Once Forgiven's Now Free reply to the atheists that respond to his atheist nightmare question. As we can see, he doesn't even start off very well. He can't even get out the gate without actually trying to quote mine somebody. Let's go ahead and spot which one of these is not like the others.
No, I'm not intelligently designed. My brain is not intelligently designed.
No, my brain was not intelligently designed.
Hell to the no. No, it wasn't.
Our brains are notoriously not reliable. Memory is very shaky.
I don't know whether my brain was designed by an intelligent agent or not.
Is your brain intelligently designed? And the answer to that would be no, of course.
Okay, guess which atheist he quote mined? FSX23. If it's your guess, then you are correct. All of them are answering his Once Forgiven's Now Free essential question, but FSX, if you actually take a look in context of what he's saying, he's not actually answering the question. And I'm sorry, Once Forgiven Now Free, you can even say, well, I put a link into the description box of his full video. That doesn't save you. A quote mine is to take a saying out of context and to make it appear to say something else. He wasn't addressing your question. Let's look at the full view of what he's actually saying.
Okay, now entertaining the idea that our brains were intelligently designed, one would ask, what were they designed to do? That's a good question. Our brains are notoriously not reliable. Memory is very shaky. Your brain will just generate things out of thin air. It's not a very perfect or fail-proof system, and it's very prone to error. So if it was designed, I don't know what your design would be.
So there you have it. That's what he's saying. He's saying if we grant you your design hypothesis, then you would have no idea what your design would be. He is not answering your question. So you start off and you're not very good so far. Let's go ahead and continue.
So a few weeks ago, I issued a challenge for atheists, asking them if their brain was intelligently designed. And if it wasn't, then why should they trust it? You wouldn't trust a computer that wasn't intelligently programmed, and you wouldn't use a calculator that wasn't intelligently put together. So why should you trust your brain or your thoughts if it wasn't intelligently designed? So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who responded. The full responses with the links will be located in the description of this video. If you want to see the full response, you can go do that since I can only show clips of it in here. So if you want, you can go subscribe to them, to their channels, and go support them. So let's start off with a clarification. In the challenges, I never asked for evidence that your brain evolved. I'm granting you your position for the sake of the argument. In other words,
you never said in the original video that you're granting the position. You said that atheists should defend their position and that they should give more than a yes or no answer. Acting like you're surprised why they gave evidence for evolution, it makes no sense. You're either stupid or you're just being an ale here. There's really no other choices.
if you think your brain was not intelligently designed, then let's assume that. Now given that, why should you, or anyone else, trust it?
Well, since you're making no argument that it is impossible to make any true statements just because we believe that our brain evolved, you are asking for us to account for nothing at all. If you're going to make an argument that we can't trust our brains because of evolutionary processes, then you're going to have to make that argument. Otherwise, going, well, aren't you supposed to be skeptical of that? No, it's not going to do it. That's not enough.
Here's what the YouTuber Peach7 said, which reveals the problem. You are correct. I have no reason to trust my own thoughts. That is why I rely on evidence. But of course, what will the Peak 7 do when he receives the evidence? Well, we can only assume that he'll think about it. However, he just told us that he doesn't trust his own thoughts. And this...
Which is why he relies on evidence. You don't seem to understand the difference between relying on evidence and relying on your thoughts. I am depending on an outside source. Yes, it has to come through my senses and be processed by my brain. But at least when we go through the scientific process, there is a process we call peer review. It is more than just one individual. Unless you want to play the whole solipsism card, it really doesn't have to be addressed. So we confirm by other people that this phenomenon acts in a certain way. And we make models and construct theories about it, and other people either confirm or refute such positions. Quite simple, isn't it?
This is the problem I'm trying to get at. If your brain was not intelligently designed, then you can't trust your own thoughts. And if...
Again, you have to do more than bare assertions than in order to make that point.
you can't trust your own thoughts, then there's no point in using your thoughts to try and justify your beliefs about anything. You've just destroyed your own foundation. However, most of the atheists that replied didn't think that this was even a problem.
And just because I think my brain is intelligently or not intelligently designed doesn't bring my belief system into question at all, whatever it is. I don't know how those are related, and so I'm kind of confused on where he's going with this, actually. And I don't know why why would I not be able to trust my own thoughts? My brain works just fine as far as I know.
It doesn't raise any red flags for me at all, but I'm looking forward to you telling me why it should.
This is a problem for atheists because you believe that your brain was not intelligently designed, but rather evolved. But if evolution were true, it's a process that is driven towards survival, not true. That's why they call it survival of the fittest and not survival of those whose beliefs best correspond with reality. Besides, most people believe in God. So if evolution selects for true beliefs, then how come most people believe in God? And so...
Okay, so you're actually making a shitty argument of Alvin Plantinga's argument against naturalism. That's just what you're basically doing here. You're basically referencing this argument while doing a bad job of actually making the argument. Yeah, it's quite easy to understand why people believe in God. Okay, let's go ahead and go down this thought experiment. How would evolution select our cognitive abilities? Well, there's two types of errors we could make. We could either make a false negative or a false positive. What a false negative is there is a predator in the bushes, you hear it rustle, but you do nothing about it, and therefore you're eaten by the tiger. So we can see in evolutionary processes there will be at least a bias against that first type of error. The other error is false positives. False positive is you hear the bushes rustle, you assume it is a predator, and you run away. Well, the cost of that is not too much. You still survive to breed another day. So we can see a bias towards false positives. Now, given that, you say, why would evolution, since it doesn't select for truth, which is true, it doesn't select for truth, it just selects for bias, then why would it select for people who believe in theism? Well, I would say theism is a false positive. So there you go. You're attributing a God to where there is none. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all beliefs are wrong or should come into question. It just that means you have to start justifying in what you believe.
Atheists actually have to believe that evolution is a process that produces species which believe things that are false about reality.
Evolution itself does not produce beliefs. It produces certain cognitive abilities, and we are prone to false positives. Take pareidolia for one example.
The problem is, atheists are part of that evolutionary process too. And if we evolve to believe things that are false, how can we trust our minds? So as you can see,
I don't. There you go. I don't trust my mind. But the automatic assumption that you make is that, oh, well, therefore everything therefore I believe is wrong. No, this is why we require justification. This is why we require testing. This is why we require falsification. This is why we require peer review. Talk about a case of just not getting it.
according to atheists, evolution doesn't produce true beliefs. And so your worldview is inconsistent because if it were true, you couldn't trust your own thoughts. Which brings us back to the question I originally asked. Shouldn't your entire worldview come into question? Because if there was no God, then your brain would be, ultimately, the product of a big bang. You believe that hydrogen, a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas, can turn into people, give or take 14 billion years. And so your thought process is
The fallacy of oversimplification, or the fallacy of single cause. Yeah, if I wanted to make the entire natural process or the natural history of the entire universe strawman it and make it seem dumb, that would be the way I'd go. So either you know you're being dishonest here, or you're really, really dumb. I'll let you throw yourself under the bus. Go ahead and pick which way you want to throw yourself under the bus.
simply the outworking of the laws of physics and chemistry. You're like a pop can that was shaken up and you happen to fizz atheistically while most people happen to fizz theistically. In this scenario, your thoughts and beliefs would have no actual correspondence with the external world. Your beliefs are simply the way the chemicals in your head happen to react. That's it, nothing more. And since you...
Okay, still in that fallacy of oversimplification there. If my beliefs about reality match reality, then they're true. That's it. This whole thing of we're coming from hydrogen and it's all natural processes and therefore we can't have beliefs about reality is somehow suddenly absurd. Yeah, you're talking about absurdity here. I think it's absurd to say we can't have beliefs about reality just because we're all physical processes. That is what is absurd.
don't believe in the soul or in anything that can transcend the laws of nature, then you can't even account for the concept of free will within your worldview. Your thoughts must be, ultimately, predetermined by the laws of nature. This is in opposition to rationality, which requires choice. You believe
Rationality requires choice. No, what rationality is the giving amount a certain what most amount of reasonable people would do. That would be the rational choice. That's it. Whether or not you actually have the actual ability to choose and what it actually means to choose is really beside the point here. Just because, I mean, if you want to talk about reliability, then I don't understand how we have to be divorced from chemical processes. We would have to actually depend on chemical processes. I mean, how else does a calculator come up with the same answer with the same problem time after time? It would have to follow some sort of law and just not make random choices. It's not making random choices, it's actually following the laws of logic and therefore becoming reliable. Hey, what a thought.
that rationality came from non-rationality. I believe they were the product of an intelligent mind, while you believe they are the product of a big bang. But why would you trust your rationality if it is the product of something non-rational?
Because we have evidence for it. What else would we need? If there's evidence for it, then we can justify our beliefs in it. How hard is that? Seriously.
literally have a non-rational foundation for your belief system. Now, on somewhat of a side note, I do want to bring up what I think is an important point about circularity, which I think might help to clarify a few things. Obviously, we're discussing the validity of our brains And so we have to first assume that our brains are reliable in order to have this discussion. Anyone who concludes that their brain is trustworthy has used their brain to come to that conclusion. Now, while this is circular reasoning, you have to remember that circular arguments are often valid, because if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. It might be begging the question, but that doesn't make it false. And
Oh my freaking god. Seriously, dude? No. Circular reasoning is often invalid because it's a logical fallacy. And the fact that you're trying to make an argument that it actually is valid just shows how much of a rat you are on a sinking ship. It's begging the question. And that doesn't make it true. Okay? It doesn't make it true. Only things that can make it true is evidence. That you can actually so in a way that it actually matches reality. And just not assume that your reasoning is valid because your reasoning is valid. You have to do better than that.
so the problem with any atheistic worldview that I'm pointing out here is not that their justification for rationality is circular, but that it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent because you assume the rationality of your mind, or your brain, in order to come up with a theory about your brain which would undermine its validity. To use
I don't think you understand what you're saying. Just because we are irrational or we don't have full cognitive abilities or completely immune to cognitive biases and prone to errors and delusions and hallucinations doesn't mean we can't have access to any truth. Seriously, you got to do better than this.
more philosophical term, it's self-referentially inconsistent. On the other hand, the Christian defense for the rationality of the brain is also circular, but it's consistent. I'll explain that in a bit. Now, when I asked atheists to defend their worldview or belief system, most of them claimed that they didn't have one.
It's not a faith, it's not a religion, it's not a belief system.
What belief system? I honestly don't know what you're talking about here.
But I wouldn't call atheism a belief system.
What belief system? What belief system are you talking about, man?
A worldview is, according to Wikipedia, the fundamental cognitive orientation of an individual. Are you telling me you don't have a cognitive orientation? To dumb it down, a worldview...
Okay, you playing stupid here is no excuse. It is very clear in the clips that you show that atheism is not a worldview. Atheism itself does not dictate a worldview. Not that they don't have worldviews, maybe they're stating it incorrectly, but atheism is not what directs it. To say atheism is a worldview is to have the tail wagging the dog. Atheism is a conclusion. A worldview is how you arrive at that conclusion. If you want to know more than that, then your questions and what you expect how to have answered requires a whole lot more video than we can even go into. If you want to know about epistemology, how they justify their epistemology, that is a whole nother issue.
is how you look at the world.
I don't have a belief system. I have no belief system to defend. There you go. That was easy, wasn't it?
This won't cut it. You have a belief system and you have a worldview. Your worldview is atheistic in nature because it doesn't include God. And, since it doesn't include God, you can't account for logic and rationality. You have positive beliefs about the nature of reality and how we can come to know things. If you want to convince people that your position is correct, then you need to learn how to defend your belief system. Pretending you don't have one isn't going to make the problem go away, and it's not going to exclude you from having to defend your belief system. So finally,
In your original video, you never said that it was about defending worldviews. You were talking about atheists and how they answer the question whether or not they believe their brain was intelligently designed. So arriving somehow to worldviews and that they have to somehow justify that doesn't make sense.
what is the Christian position? In the Christian worldview, we are not a body, we are a soul, and we have a body. We are free agents, and we can freely choose our actions and our thoughts because our immaterial self is not governed by the predetermined laws of nature. God is truth, and He created us in His image, and He intelligently designed our brains with the ability to understand and discover His creation. And while
God is truth is a sentence that does not make sense. Truth is that your ideas about reality match reality. That's truth. Saying God is truth does not make sense. And all you're doing here is just espousing your ideas or your beliefs, rather than providing evidence that your position is consistent and evidently backed it up. But you don't.
that doesn't mean that we know everything, it does tell us that our reasoning faculties are generally reliable and trustworthy.
No, you don't. But that is an assumption based on your beliefs. It is nothing more than a naked assertion. You have to do better.
As 1 Corinthians 13:12 says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know fully." So atheists believe that rationality came from something irrational, perhaps matter and energy, or nothingness, or whatever they want to claim, but Christians believe that rationality came from a mind, namely the mind of God. God is
Rationality is nothing more than acting rational. In other words, acting optimally given to a certain situation. You're just acting reasonably. To say it is a invented thing, that it needs a creator God invented mind, it makes no sense.
a rational, logical, intelligent being, and He created us in His image. And so our mind is the derivative of God's mind. Our rationality comes from a rational source. Note again that I'm not providing you with evidence that God exists here.
That's right, you're just making bare assertions and just saying your position is consistent and just leaving it at that and not realizing the burden of proof that you're actually avoiding by doing this. Just, if you're going to want us to account for reason, logic, and rationality, you also have to account for it. And you also just have to also account for it in God, and you have to account for God.
Telling you my worldview and showing you why I can make sense of rationality given my worldview. My belief system is consistent. Yours is not.
You don't understand ours. You have the tail wagging the dog. So you don't even understand how our belief systems work, because you don't even understand what atheism is and what it entails.
I'll just address a few objections to my view. Some atheists claim that God may have designed our minds to deceive us, in which case, obviously, we couldn't trust our minds or know anything. After all, maybe God is a deceiver and He doesn't want us to know the truth. Now, if you understand what I already said in this video, then you should know what my answer is going to be. In fact, maybe you should pause this video and try to think of what my answer will be based on what I've already said.
Okay, you're going to assert that you are true because you are true. That's it. You're going to assert your brain is reliable because you have used the brain to determine that you are reliable. Because what you believe about the universe and about God and about reason and rationality is consistent with that. In other words, you're just going to assert you're right.
Okay, here's my answer. You're right that if God would have designed our minds to deceive us, then we couldn't know anything, and we couldn't trust our brains. And that is exactly why I don't believe that. In fact, if I ever run into someone who believes that, then I would actually point out to them that their belief is inconsistent. Because if it were true, they couldn't trust their own thoughts, including their thoughts that God was deceiving them.
No, you are equivocating here. Just because you're assuming that you are being deceived or your brain is unreliable, it does not mean you are wrong all the time, every time. Which that would also be a self-refuting position. No, it just means that you cannot trust your thoughts or senses, or you're being lied to, you're being deceived. even if you can come to that conclusion that you are being deceived, does not mean that therefore your senses are reliable. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? So it is not a self-refuting position. You have to do better than that. You have not demonstrated how you can get out of this Cartesian sort of demon sort of situation. You're just saying your senses are reliable because your senses are reliable. Descartes couldn't do any better than that himself either. He pretty much had to assume that as well. But it is still an assumption, not a proof. You have to demonstrate.
So just like the atheist position, this would be an example of another self-refuting position, so you shouldn't believe it. Instead, if we assume the Christian position that I previously explained, then that makes sense of...
See? Assume the Christian position. Assume. Nothing more than beliefs based on a naked assertion that they are correct. Nothing more.
reason and rationality. And so if you want to live a life that is consistent with what you profess to believe, and that can provide us with good reasons to trust our minds and our beliefs, then I invite you to Christianity. Without God,
you have demonstrated nothing. I don't think you understand what you are saying.
You couldn't know anything. The Bible says that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. This isn't just name-calling. It's literally a foolish thing to believe, because if God is not at the foundation of your worldview, then you would have no reason to trust your own thoughts, which means you can't know anything. And if you believe in a worldview that makes knowledge impossible, then you are, by definition, a fool.
Okay, you still don't understand what you are saying. Nice quote mining of Psalms 1:4. Psalms of, 14:1. That is about morality. That saying is saying that there are no moral standards. That is what it says. It says nothing about rationality or logic or anything like that. And if you want to argue that we have to account for logic and reason, then you have to make an argument for that. But you, of course, have to use logic and reason to even make that argument. Therefore, logic and reason are necessary. Therefore, I don't have to prove it. There you go. And that's what logic is. Logic is basically saying, this is how the world works. That's why it refutes your position. What else do you need to be refuted by except, well, this is not how reality works? I mean, to even have language, you have to assume the first three laws of logic, or language itself does not even make sense. All right, well, thank you for listening. I am the Atheist Paladin, and remember, rationality is the path to righteousness.